In today's lesson and in the next, we are going to look at figures of speech based on comparison, where two things from different categories are compared. We are going to look at the simile, we are going to look at the metaphor, and we're going to put it through to the conceit, which is just an elaborate metaphor. And then we'll look at personification and anthropomorphism. The last two will be dealt with in the next lesson. Today, we'll look only at simile and metaphor. Now, simile compares, as we said, things from different categories. But we must remember that the two different categories will have something in common. There will be something similar, and that is the shared characteristic or characteristics that we are talking about. We're going to compare in order to see similarities. When using a simile as opposed to a metaphor, you have to have the word like. One thing is like another, or as, it is as something as another, or it is more so than another. So the key words to remember for simile will be like, as, and than. A simile is also called an explicit comparison. In other words, I explicitly say, this thing is like another thing. It's explicit, right? It's said out there, right? You transfer the characteristic of the one thing to the second thing. For instance, if you say that he is slyer than a fox, you take the aspect of slyness that belongs to a fox and you transfer it to he. So he is like a fox, meaning that he is cunning. The shared characteristic is the cunningness, right? If you say the food is as bad as last year, you are looking at the poor quality of the food, and you're going to say the food of last year is just as bad as the food of this year. So in other words, you're going to say they are more or less equal in terms of the characteristic of being of a poor quality. If you say she is pretty as a picture, you look at the quality of the picture, which is beauty, for instance, aesthetic beauty, and you transfer it to the she, and you're going to say that the one is equal to the other in terms of its prettiness or in its beauty. They eat like pigs. We take the quality of pigs being gluttonous, and we say that they remind us of pigs. They eat the same way as pigs eat. Do you have it? We have like, as, than. That must be part of a simile. Here is another example. The children descended on the buffet like locusts, suggesting their eagerness, just as eager as the locusts were to attack whatever they had to eat. In the same way, the children virtually attacked the table and were very eager to start eating. Her eyes were as blue as sapphires. Look at the color of the eyes. The eyes were like sapphires. They were as blue as. So the shared characteristic is the blueness of the eyes. Right, now sometimes we find that an entire poem can be a simile, and we call that an extended simile. If we say we are as deer, we have the explicit comparison there, the simile. We are as deer. We are just like deer. Right. But now what the poem does is they say exactly in which ways we are like deer. So it extends the simile and gives us more than one characteristic of the deer to be transferred to how we are in our relationship. Let's have a look. What did we say to each other that now we are as deer who walk single file? We don't walk hand in hand anymore. We walk single file. We have our heads high. We don't speak casually to each other. We have our heads high. We are somehow aloof. We are distant from each other. We have our ears forward and our eyes watchful. In other words, we are very careful not to make a little mistake, right? Our hooves are placed on firm ground. We are realistic about what has become of this relationship. And our limbs are always in latent flight. In other words, we are ready to flee should we have to. So in all these ways, we are like deers. So can you see more than one characteristic brought in, and the simile is just extended to make it more colorful, more vivid. Then, of course, we get to a metaphor. We said that a simile is an explicit comparison, but a metaphor is an implicit comparison. In other words, we don't say one thing is like the other. We say the one thing indeed is the other. So we make this connection even closer, and can you see that the impact is even stronger? If I say you are a pig, it's not quite the same as to say you are like a pig. Can you see the first is somewhat softer? So the implicit comparison where the one thing is the other thing, it has more impact, it's stronger. So also we get it from two different categories. You is the one character, you're a human being. A pig, of course, is an animal, so two categories, right? But the difference is it is exactly the same as a simile, except for the fact that no comparing words are used, right? Once again, we transfer the characteristic of the second thing to the first thing. If I say, she is sunshine, brightening my day, we are saying she is sunshine. She is not like sunshine. See, she is the sunshine. She is sunshine itself, and it brightens my day. Or if you say life is a highway, you are not using the word like. But in all other terms, a simile and a metaphor actually work exactly the same. Now, when in tests, for instance, you are asked to identify, you need to understand the difference between identify, explain, and how effective is it. Those are the three things that you need to do. So firstly, you need to identify, for instance, the simile. If you need to do that, you need to say, in the simile, the thing from this category is likened to something from another category, and the word either it is like, as, or than used, within that example. So you say there is a comparison between something and something, the two things from the two categories, using. Now you've identified the simile as a simile. That is just identify. And you will very seldom be asked just to identify the simile. You will be asked a more elaborate question. But firstly, you need the identification is always the first step, whatever the question is. So you need to take note of this. Or identify the metaphor. Then you say, instead of saying using like, as, or than for a simile, you say there is a direct comparison between the one thing in this category and the other thing. Now you've identified the metaphor. So that is worth only 1 mark, right? In a longer answer. But you need to be able to identify. That's step 1. Fine. Now you may be asked to identify and explain. Now this is the next step. In other words, you've now identified the simile, but you must explain exactly what and what are compared in this simile. So you say, this is a simile, this is compared to that. So you say, for instance, in it, she is like a butterfly. You're going to have to say, just as a butterfly is like this, she has similar qualities. Remember, you're going to have to look at the similarity, the characteristic that can be transferred from the one to the other. Think of butterflies, fragile, beautiful, etc. So she is compared to a butterfly using like. You have identified it. Can you see that? Step 1. And then just as the butterfly is dainty, beautiful, fragile, so is she. Now you have explained it. Fine? And there will be even more elaborate questions. But if you are asked to explain the simile or the metaphor, this is what you do. This, compare to that, and elaborate what the similarity is. In the same way, explain the metaphor. The man is a jackal. There is a direct comparison between the man and a jackal. That's done. Just as the man is cunning, so is the man. 2 marks. You have identified and explained. 2 marks. Can be no more than that. Right? Now, if you have to explain the effectiveness, you have 3 steps. Right? So if you are asked to explain the effectiveness of the simile or of the metaphor, you're going to do 3 things. You are going to say what are compared. This thing is compared to the other. You are going to say, explain it, what the common element is that the two have, the similarity. And now you're going to say why, within a certain context, the simile or the metaphor is effective. Right. Now, it isn't always very easy, but you're going to have to just keep these basics in mind. Let's have a look at quite a difficult poem, or part of quite a difficult poem, A Prayer for Violence, John Donne, Batter My Heart, 3-person God, that one. In that poem, he says, I like. Now, immediately you see that there is a comparison, and it is a simile. The moment there's a like, you know that it's a simile. You're going to have to somehow say that it's a simile. Well, this is, remember, old language here. I like an usurped town, to another due, labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. So, you have now firstly identified that there is a simile. In the simile, the speaker compares himself to a usurped town. Can you see? You have identified the 2 things that are compared, and you have explained. Now, sorry, that is just identifying. Then I said, in the same way that a usurped town now belongs to another country and must submit to its power, right? He owes loyalty to a power that has taken him prisoner. Does it make sense to you? That is an explanation. You explain the simile that you have identified, right? Now, what is the effect within this poem? Why is it effective? It says the simile suggests that he wants to admit God to his life, but that another power has taken possession of him first. So what have you done? You have pulled this identification and the explanation through to the poem itself or the text itself that you're talking about, and you've in context said what the effect was within the poem itself or the text itself. In the same way as a simile can be extended, so a metaphor can be extended. If you say, for instance, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players, they have their exits and their entrances, and no man in time plays many parts. Now, this is a melancholy Jacques speaking, and as you like it. And can you see that you say the world is compared to a stage, and then what you did is elaborate, like we said in the example of the metaphor, of the simile. It's same thing works in a metaphor. I said we're going to pull this through to a conceit. A conceit is a metaphor. It is just a metaphor, but it's something mostly used by the metaphysical poets, and they took incongruous things. You remember we said the two categories. Things from categories that you would never ever think could be similar in any way. They came and brought it together, and they made these very strange metaphors, very elaborate metaphors. But they are called conceits in terms of metaphysical poetry. So it's an intricate metaphor or simile. Remember, it's can be either, but it has this aspect of incongruity. Comparisons between two things that appear to be totally unrelated. They use things from science and physics, whatever, and they brought it together, and it became strange metaphors. Right, for instance, in A Valediction Forbidding Mourning by John Donne, two lovers are compared to what other than twin compasses. Now, can you imagine that? So, but listen to what he says. If they be two, they are two, so as stiff twin compasses are two. So they are only two in a way. If you think of compasses, that compasses are two. They are joined. Do you understand? So it's a very strange comparison, but it makes a point. Now, once again, you're going to have to say two things that are compared using like, right? And then explain exactly what you got compared there, and then look at the effect. So this conceit utilizes an elaborate simile. It is an elaborate simile to emphasize and symbolize the strength and the closeness of the relationship that exists between the two, right? Now, an explanation in terms of the actual context. He says he's going to depart. I'm saying goodbye. It's a valediction. Bye. But please, we're going to stay together like twin compasses, right? I'm going to run around and you're going to stay put. So he says, during his departure, his wife will be like the fixed foot of a compass. Just as the fixed part of the compass allows the other foot to draw a circle, so will his wife. Can you see? I've just explained the simile in the same way as I did in the beginning, but I've brought it to the context of the poem. Who stays in a place and is steadfast, allowing him, of course, to roam and then come back to her, and she'll still be there. So, today's lesson then on similes and metaphors have come to an end. See you next time.